Do you need this copy?
All right, guys. We're going to go ahead and start. It's 5 o'clock. We're going to start our joint education budget meeting, and I'm going to open this up with the word of prayer. Go by your heads. Father, we are thankful to be here tonight. We're thankful for the Memorial Day weekend we just had, Lord. I pray for the families of those who've lost loved ones, who've served our country. I remember Mr. Bradley tonight from Portland, an email we received earlier, whose house burned down, World War II veteran. I pray that you be with him tonight. I pray that you be with us as we discuss the business of your county, especially this evening as we discuss the budget and the coming year, and that we would make wise decisions as we spend the money, make decisions for people of Sumner County. Lead, guide us, and direct us in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. All right, recognition of the public. Does anyone here would like to speak? Seeing none, report of the education chair. For those of you on the education committee, we will not meet next Monday night, June 7th. The only thing, I talked to her a moment today, the only other thing on there is Dr. Phillips' yearly bond, and then some information on the amendments. We'll just pass those on to budget. So no meeting. And then I did make a note, one other thing that I would like to consider legislative, maybe looking at as we meet later this month is, I'm a visual learner, and I'm okay with, I have my own device, so I'm not using my iPad, I have my own, but when we get to this time of year and we're discussing budget, school budget, I would like to have a hard copy of that beforehand, just so I can go through that before we vote on things. Other than that, I'm fine with having everything.
You want it early from the meeting?
I would love to have it about a few days early, just to look over it, maybe next year, moving forward. And that's all I have. Report of County Mayor.
You're doing a fine job.
All right.
Keep up this thing.
New business. Dr. Phillips is here to discuss the 21-22 school board budget, so I'm going to turn it over to him at this time.
All righty. Thank you, sir. I'll try to stand here with the microphone. All of you know me. I move around quite a bit, so I might stray and get away from the microphone, but I'll try to stand here. It's good to see you. Thanks for having the combined meeting. I think this is maybe 6 or 7 years in a row that we've done this way, and so it works out really good, and I appreciate you guys' willingness to accommodate and be here all at one time for education and combined budget. Go through the slideshow, which you guys probably have, all of you have sat through previous budget presentations from me. And so the slideshow looks very similar, different things on there, but the formatting is the same. Try to do that year over year, so there's some consistency so people kind of can understand and know the methodology and kind of how we build the budget. Always starting with personnel and then working down from that. Our mission, of course, we have the same mission that we've had for a number of years. Sumner County Schools commits to growing learners who are college and career ready through quality instruction, effective use of resources, building a collaborative culture, and strong leadership. Budget goals remain the same every year. We try to find every way possible to increase efficiency and effectiveness inside the system. We try to always look at expanding opportunities for students, and I think you guys obviously know about all of those things. And then drive resources to the classroom, and I think certainly since 2014 we've had marked improvement in many areas to drive resources to the classroom, whether it's instructional allocation, whether it's technology. We've always tried to continue to drive more and more resources directly to the classrooms and to the school campuses. Process pretty much stays the same. Starting in February, I meet with all of the principals. Then we go to department heads, and then around April we get to cabinet level. Then we have a budget workshop in May. We vote in May at the school board, and then of course come here early June for the combined meeting, and hopefully approved here this evening, and then on to the county in June. And you know, you've heard me say over and over before, but having that cycle, which, you know, previous to 2014, we really didn't have that cycle. We were sometimes in continuation budgets until state law said we had to pass a budget, which was really not a positive thing for us in the school system, because we are competing for talent every year, and if we're not sure if we can hire people or not until September, you know, most folks that are candidates for jobs in our business usually have jobs secured by May, and so if you are not out there on the front end, then sometimes you're getting left with those that are not employed late in the year, and that's not a good thing. So it really helps us as far as recruiting to be able to have some certainty, and appreciate the commission for giving us that over the last 5 or so years. Always start with revenue changes. Local funding increase a little over $8.5 million. And that looks like a large number because it is a large number. If you go back through my budget presentations in previous years, you will see that that is higher than most years. David always does a good job communicating with me. We talk through kind of throughout the year how we're coming in as far as revenue compared to budget, what our trend is. I think we both have had the philosophy that we would be as conservative as possible projecting future year revenues. Last year we were in somewhat of a weird situation at the onset of the pandemic. We really had no idea. I mean, you guys didn't either with the county. We really didn't have any idea where we were going to be, so we took a very, very conservative approach to the budget. Just like you guys, we kind of wanted to factor in worst case scenario, build a budget based on that. So when you see this revenue increase year over year, you have to understand that that is the first year. Last year's budget was the first year that we decreased local funding. We decreased our actual revenue mark because we were trying to be really conservative, and of course we were very fortunate that that revenue came in higher throughout this last fiscal year than we had budgeted. So you get a little bit in that $8.5 million of the change in better revenue than we anticipated in this past budget, and then a pretty average number of growth year over year in local funding. So that kind of combined. The state funding picture is the opposite of that. Last year, the day after the budget was approved, in June, we received a letter that said, hey, you're going to have $3 million less in BEP. So just like that, $3 million was gone. So the opposite story from the one I just said is what happened with state BEP. So state BEP is about $1.5 million more for next fiscal year, even though if you look at actual revenue from this current year, it would be more like $4 million or so in new funding. When I talk about fund balance, and you guys know this, undesignated and then fund balance in general, you know, we can have those swings of several $1 million pretty quickly in a $300 million budget. So you really have to make sure that you have planned and that you've been fiscally conservative to try to make sure that if you have those things happen, it doesn't disrupt your operations. So a little over $10 million in new revenue for the upcoming fiscal year. This one always has lots of numbers on it, and I try to go through them, and somewhat a little bit confusing. The school system, you guys know this, we are required by law to keep a mandatory amount of dollars in fund balance, and that's made up with a formula that the state provides. You have to submit your budget, obviously electronically each year, and then they tell you if you pass the fund balance test or if you fail the fund balance test, of course. So we know that we have to have a little over $11 million remaining undesignated to be able to meet the fund balance test through the state. That's made up of operating expenditures minus capital, a percentage, and then also daycare funds that are restricted out just for use with daycares in the schools. assigned to remain in fund balance, this is what I'm asking. Last year, that number was $6 million. If you look at that, we had that $6 million in there for the uncertainty of the pandemic, which I think was really a smart thing to do. This year, we're trying to shield ourselves again a little bit from some unknown for this year, moving into next year. And so we've asked that we increase that to 15. If you look, the difference in the dollars that we collected and receipted locally helps us be able to conserve those dollars, not re-budget them this year, and hopefully have a little bit more fiscal stability over time. Projected undesignated fund balance is just under $24 million. So if you look down through that, basically you're budgeting, like we always do, some of that revenue from fund balance to balance your budget, and but less than we have in the past as a percentage. And then you have an undesignated fund balance of a little over $3.4 million. About 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I guess now, 5 budget cycles, was the first time that we were able to start putting dollars undesignated. Let me tell you where that becomes obviously pretty important. If you remember back several months ago, February, I think it was late January, when the legislature went into special session and they used some dollars for 1% bonuses for teachers. But they didn't include all teachers. They just included teachers that are classified as classroom teachers, but maybe guidance counselors, librarians, a lot of folks weren't included in that. None of our classified, which is about 50% of our staffing, were included in what the state was funding. So some school systems, I'm sure, handled it differently than we did. We didn't feel like that was the right thing. It took all of our folks to work through the pandemic. So we went ahead and out of unbudgeted fund balance from the previous year, we went ahead and assigned that 1% bonus for April's paycheck to all employees within the school system. And so that's why having some of that unbudgeted dollars that you can use throughout the year sometimes is really important. So that was one example of how we did it this past year. We always start with personnel because obviously we're a labor-driven business model, so personnel and payroll associated costs always make up a big chunk of our budget and what we do. So we had a little over $5 million in pay increases and associated costs this year. If you look, this kind of gets choppy, but if you look across, we're trying to keep up with red and green. So you can see that we've had pay increases consistently across the board in varying degrees by all of our employees classified are certified 0 to 23 or 24 plus, which are what we consider to be off the scale. This year we kind of went back to what we were doing pre-pandemic, 2% for classified, which is considered a step, and then a step for certified 0 to 23, which is required by law, and then 24 plus at 1.5%. So if you average all of those out across the system, it would be about 1.7% pay increase. And I know the county, I think, did something a little different. We try to be in lockstep every year, and I think we have been for many years. But I think the county did something different this year. We obviously support that 100%. We had a change in our certified personnel back in January of 20, which was kind of different than what we've done in the past. So, we realize that there always has to be some adjustment and balance made between county and schools, and certainly that's something that we support. Medical and dental increases. We have a very good medical plan, and I know you guys do as well. We have been able to weather some of the cost increases over time without having to really increase rates. So I think we've done a really nice job with that, and all the folks that work with us. Employee Benefits Committee, we have over 30 people, I think, now that work with us through our employees that work on that committee. And then we have consultants as well. And then, of course, it comes up through Amanda and myself. But this year will be a very minimal increase for us, I think around 4%, which obviously post-pandemic in the medical world, that's a pretty reasonable increase year over year. Teachers and additional staffing adjustments, a little over $1 million. If you look, I split it up because ESSER are the funds that are coming in three different tranches, 1, 2, and 3, kind of bills as far as the dollar value is concerned. I have a rule, if you're going to employ personnel through any of those means, such as federal funds or grants or those types of things, you know, we vet those heavily because we anticipate those positions to continue inside the school system once those dollars in. So we really hire people that we know those positions are needed, and we're going to absorb them over the course of the next several years inside the system. And if you look at this on the right-hand side, social workers, of course, we started social workers within the school system. We had some in SPED previously, but we started some through Katie Brown's office with Safe and Healthy Schools. So we're adding to those. We knew we were going to do that anyway because it's been very successful for us, helping counselors and principals, teachers and students and families. So we were going to add to that. We're just being able to do it early since we have ESSER funds. Lead educators, we're trying to get a one-to-one in elementary and middle school and high school. So we continue to add to that group. We were going to do that anyway. Consulting teacher, 2 SPED coordinators, 2 nurses. I've got a slide on here where we've gone from, gosh, I don't know, 14 or so nurses 6-7 years ago now to 50 or so. And obviously I'll talk about that in a second when I show that slide. A virtual coordinator, because we'll have some students that choose to do virtual in the high school world. We're not doing it in K-8 this coming year, but we are going to allow it in high school. So even if you think about that and you have a couple of hundred students, you just have to have somebody to help coordinate that, because they'll no longer, under the new rules in the state, they'll no longer be members of HHS or Beach or White House. They'll be members of the virtual school. And so it looks very different from a management perspective than it did this past year. So we have to have somebody kind of help that. Edgenuity is the platform that's used for those courses, and you just about have to have somebody that's an expert in Edgenuity to answer questions about all the way from specifics about a course or grade or I can't log in, all types of things. And then a financial analyst, I can assure you that we want to make sure that every dollar that's spent through ESSER is spent appropriately, that we're transparent with that and that we're accountable for it. And honestly, to do that correctly, you just about have to have someone that's their primary job, is to just make sure that it's done correctly for all of those new funds. Over on the left-hand side are things that are non-ESSER funded positions, just out of GP. 5 growth teachers, which is a little bit lower. We usually have about 10 in there, but this year we have 5, because I think we've targeted pretty well what we think our enrollment will be in August. 1 nurse that we would have added. Liberty Creek principals, I mentioned that. I think we had a press release last week where we're going to go ahead and have named the principals of Liberty Creek for the opening of those schools. Custodians, some of those will be hired late in the budget cycle in the fiscal year for Liberty Creek. So there's some additional positions in there to be prepared for Liberty Creek's opening, even though they may not be hired until March of next year. So it's just a partial year run of some of those. Guidance coordinator to help us coordinate all of our guidance counselors within the school district. We think that's something that's needed. And then IT supply and logistics, Chris and his team do a nice job with our technology and making sure that it's out and working and doing things that we need to do as far as supporting teachers and administrators out on the campuses. But we have become, over time, a pretty tech-rich environment, and that's a good thing. But it also means that you have a lot of actual devices coming into the system and going out, and then old devices coming back in on rotation. So just need somebody that really specializes more in supply and logistics to make sure that happens correctly. and ordering and all that sort of stuff. So looking to hire that position. We've talked about it for a couple of years, and we think, especially after the pandemic, with us ordering some additional technology devices for students and teachers, it's a good time to go ahead and do that. This is the nurse slide that I was talking about. You can kind of see how we've marched along here. We had total nursing staff just 6 years or so ago of 23. Now we have 50. You know, when I look at this and how we've cut our ratio in half and think, you know, what a blessing that was this year, because I can't imagine trying to manage quarantine and pandemic and CDC rules and TDOH rules. If we would have been back here, it would have been just, Chairman Sullivan, it would have been tough. You know, it would have been hard. But because we've ramped up our nursing across the system, I think we were able to manage that much better. I think, let's see, capital improvements for middle school and elementary school. Let me tell you about that. Each year for several years, we've allocated dollars to high schools for capital improvements. And you've seen a lot of projects on our campuses across the county, high school campuses, where they've done facility improvements, both inside and outside, with those funds. And if you go to our campuses a lot, high school campuses, you can really tell that, because they've done a nice job of spending those dollars to improve things. We're going to continue to do that. So the dollars that are out there for high school, the $100,000 we give to every high school, is still in the budget this year. It is not something new. That's just something that's recurring. So it will continue this year. The new part, I think 3 budget cycles ago, the middle school principals said, hey, you know, we need some help here. So we went ahead and started, at that time, allotting $10,000 for each middle school across the county. And so they started using that for capital, whether it was redoing their gym floors, curtains for the stage, whatever it might be. As long as it qualified for capital improvements, it was just dollars that we could help them with, that they may be able to raise funds for a $20,000 project, but they could only raise $10,000 of it in their community, and then we would be able to help them with the other dollars. So this year I'm going to move that from $10,000 to $20,000, because honestly I have some middle schools that have some projects they want to get done, that they have raised funds, and they, you know, the $20,000 will help them complete the project. So I think that'll be obviously well received across all the middle schools in the county. One other thing that I did here, the elementary schools, we've never given them any capital dollars. We've tried to address issues, playground equipment or any of those types of things that were capital items individually at the school campus. When the principals come in and they give me their capital request in February every year, we try to build those things out. I was a little bit worried here, even though I haven't seen it yet. I was a little bit worried here that because we had so many changes last year, so much restriction, that we were going to get caught in a dip in the elementary school world where we couldn't have fun. We didn't have fundraisers last year. We didn't have normal things we typically do, that they raise dollars and then they spend those dollars for capital items most of the time on their school campuses, and we just couldn't do those things. We just couldn't do them. So I was a little bit concerned about that and trying to figure out how to fill that gap. So one of the ways is for us to allocate $10,000 for each elementary school. I didn't do it prorated out by size of school. I just said $10,000 across the board for all of the elementary schools to use for capital items. And I do think that will help kind of weather the storm a little bit for them. It'll certainly keep us from missing a year where our elementary school campuses really don't have any capital things happening on their campuses because they couldn't raise funds last year. Long-term disability had a little bit of change in our life insurance that we cover for school employees. Trustee commission, of course, that's by law. We usually have miscellaneous adjustments to various lines. It's usually a net positive number. It was a decrease this year. And then workers' comp and general liability, this is something Leah and I've talked about, and I know she knows about it, obviously, but we went ahead and went out and shopped our insurance on the school side. We've been together, I guess, Leah, the county and the schools for a long time. And so we went out and shopped to try to see if there was a way to save dollars and possibly get a little bit a different insurance package that might be better for the school side, and we were able to do that. So net, we were able to save about $400,000 this coming year by changing our insurance program. So all of that together, the expenditure change is about 8.7. We had a little over $10 million in new revenue, so obviously have less new expenditure than new revenue, which is a positive thing. Last couple of slides, capital funded by the commission. We always do this. David helps us, and you guys have been great. We usually spend all of this on two things, paving and buses. And so every year we rotate the oldest buses out. That number changes, but it's typically anywhere from 12 to 15, 16 buses that we buy each year. And then paving, Miss Judy's great to help us. She has already paved, she's paving Station Camp complex, so it needed it bad. So she's paving that for us this summer out there now, and she did Gallatin High School football parking lot too, because it needed it really bad. So she's already working this year based on last year's approved budget. We always get it approved and then wait until she usually starts right at the end of the school year. As soon as we get everybody off campuses, she starts for us. Balanced budget against our revenue from David. Continues to make decisions that impact schools, classrooms, employees. Continues to fund technology. I didn't talk about that, but we've moved up now to where two things that are continual for us. We've moved up to $75 per student on instructional allocation. It was $15 when I arrived. And so it's 75. It's been 75 now, I think, for 3 budget cycles. Principals feel good. When I talk to them, they say, hey, we have the dollars we need to operate here at school. And so that feels good, and I know that takes a lot of pressure off of them from having to sell cookie dough to fund the copiers and all that kind of stuff. So we're keeping that 75 there, so that's not going away. And then the technology dollars we've been sending out based on per pupil allocation. The principals know this. It's just a methodical drill now where they know how much they're receiving through the device fund, and they work with Chris and his IT team, go through their inventory, and then replace computers that need replaced, and then add computers or handheld devices where they think they need them. And so we'll continue to do that also. So those things are not going away. They're just continuing, but I didn't mention them year over year because it's dollars that are already in the budget, the base budget. So with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions you guys might have. Yes, sir.
During the height of COVID, the pandemic and all, when students weren't in school, when buses were not running, how did that help the financing? Did it save the school system any money?
Yeah.
Carry over or whatever?
We had hybrid at the beginning of the year where we didn't run one day a week on Wednesday. And then we had 2 days in January that we didn't run. But other than that, we ran every day, every other day. So there would have been some savings there, but it wouldn't have, would have been negligible in the total budget. But yes. Really the only thing you save there would have been diesel. Yeah. Diesel, yeah.
The money that came from the state for teacher increases, how did you use that? Did that go into the?
We always, let me see how to answer this. When the state says that they're going to give you a percentage, you got to figure that they're only figuring the percentage on their part of BEP. So if you look at how the state calculates BEP, it's basically none of the classified, which is about 48% of your total staffing. And they only cover about 70%, 68% of your certified. So there's a weird dynamic here. They have state law that says you can only have certain class sizes, right? It's only certain things you can do, or you're not compliant with the law. But they don't fund through BEP. They don't fund what they require you to have. Does that make sense? So they expect that to get caught in the local part of the funding. So to answer your question, after that little bit of explanation, every dollar the state sends us in raw dollars for teacher raises, we're always way above that because we include everybody. Does that make sense? So we catch everybody. So when you do that, you go way past what they give you in actual dollars allocated for a raise.
Some districts don't put that money into salaries.
So what happens there, the state says, when they send us the BEP, they say, hey, this is how much out of the new funding you have to spend on raises. Which if we do it the way that we always do here in Sumner County, we far exceed that. The legislature, and rightly so, sometimes they get worked up because some school systems don't do that. And some don't pass the raise on at all, right? They get the dollars and they don't give anybody the raise. And so I think that's really what the legislature every year struggles with is how do we say you have to spend these dollars? The systems that are doing it correctly are already exceeding that anyway. They're just trying to get the ones that when they give new dollars, they make sure at least some of those dollars are directed to pay raises for staff. We're always well ahead of that, just based on how we do it. Chairman Sutherland?
I have a question on and I know from prior experience, the technology funding, I believe, comes from an endowment or a trust. And is that where the money's coming, the $75 per student for the supply fees?
No, the $75 comes from general purpose. We allocate that out based on instruction, office, counselor, librarian, Danny. So that's all split up, and then we send that to the principal, and the principal directs that being spent per student. The teacher also gets BEP, which is a committee that teachers at that building choose how to spend that BEP on top of that $75 per student that the county gives. The technology is totally separate. So we have $750,000 a year that the district does. That's GP for the district. So the budget you guys approve, $750,000 every year. We just split up student head count, we divide it out, and then Chris tells you how much money you have. We call that the district device fund. So principals call that the DDF fund because that's dollars that we generate here in Sumner County and we push out to the campuses. The trust, the Brown Trust, from Mr. Brown that left us the endowment, that's totally separate. It has its own separate budget. What we've been doing for the last couple of budget cycles, we've been holding those dollars. So when you see, we'll have the Brown Trust will be part of the budgets you approve in the consolidated budget. And what you'll see that we had revenue last year that we did not have any expenditure. We'll have revenue again this year that we had zero expenditure. If you remember, I mentioned when we started Liberty Creek that we would let those dollars accumulate because there was no negative impact to the current principal or campus because we're still doing the 750, right? So they didn't lose anything. We just continued to do the funding for DDF. But we were going to allow those dollars to build up inside the Brown Trust so when we open Liberty Creek, we'll expend those dollars out for technology on that campus. Does that make sense? Where he lived. So I thought that was probably the most appropriate use of that money. I felt like he would be okay with that.
Any other questions for Dr. Phillips?
questions? Y'all know I'm more than happy to answer them, even if it's not now, just let me know and I'll be more than happy to answer them. Appreciate you guys' support. I think it's a good budget. We've done things over time, whether you talk about technology, instructional allocation, whether you talk about the capital funding that we've been able to get out to campuses every year, increasing our nursing staff. All these things really make a big difference in our school system. So just appreciate the support you guys always give us, and hope it continues.
All right, we have a school board approved balanced school budget for 21-22. We have a motion to send that to the budget committee.
Much approved.
All right, Commissioner Good, second. All right, Commissioner Green, any questions, any questions? All right, all those in favor say aye. Any opposition? All right, motion carries. Motion to adjourn education.
Thank you, sir. I will open up the budget. Obviously, Mr. Sullivan did a fantastic indication, so I think we're good there. Like we always do, anybody will speak in public forum, welcome when it comes to a subject matter. I'm going to forego any talking and go to the county mayor. All right, sounds good. I won't come to roll on that, but Dave, go ahead.
Anything I have will be under new business for the summary changes.
Yes, sir. New business. You want to start?
Items 1 through 4 are flow-throughs. The first one's for E911. It's a flow-through of $325,000 worth of revenue appropriations. The second is to adjust the COVID-19 funding of the state, actually decreased it, and the page numbers are actually noted beside it too, and it's actually flow-through funds. The third item is a mental health transport grant for the sheriff's department. They're completely flow-through. These are easier to make them now than after the budget's approved. And then the fourth request there is actually the salary survey. We showed it being the $50,000 being expended this year, but because the HR director will not be hired in time, then the salary survey cannot start, so we've moved that into next year's budget, if that's okay. Number 5 is the assessor's budget. He brought it back, and it was more than the $31,000, or it was actually less than what you guys had approved. It's actually on that page. And then number 6 is the discussions. Commissioner Taylor or Commissioner Chris Taylor had mentioned removing the library data fees from the libraries, but the item I want to discuss on number 6 is I think probably the best way to handle that is actually leave them in there until the budget's approved, and immediately following the budget actually move those to Mr. Carey's budget. The reason being that way you can clearly show that they met their maintenance of effort before we move the IT items. I think probably Lee would agree that'd be probably the cleanest way to make it appear. That way you know that you have met MOE. And then item number 7 is just to make sure that everybody is good on the full capital projects budget and all the changes are listed. And then the 8th item I don't have in there, we actually added in the recent debt issuance and the refinancing for next year based on the estimates.
Entertain a motion for group 1 through 4. Thank you, sir. Mr. Foster, second. Second. Mr. Rupert, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passed unanimously. As long as anything passed unanimously doesn't require a second reading. Number 5, a motion that we accept John taking less money than what we had down.
Second.
There you go. All right, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Sounds good. Make a motion number 6 that we follow Mr. Long's suggestion that we leave it in right now, and then after that we'll pull it back out for the check carry. Thank you, Mr. Good. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passed unanimously. And capital projects, does anybody have any questions on that one before we get rolling?
I think in entirety everybody had looked at it, but just hadn't been completely gone through. I just want to make sure everybody had a one chance to look at every item and if they did have any questions.
All right, so move.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passed unanimously. Dave, you want to say the turn budget?
Item B is the county and the schools budget. It's the same budget that the committee looked at the last meeting, except for the changes as noted. I'm requesting approval for both of them, the way we can go ahead and publish them in the paper.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, or any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passed unanimously. Is, 8 was,
8 is to stop putting the debt. The current, there was an estimate about changing the actual, the most recent debt issuance, and then put in the refinancing the recent issuance, and also the 2013 refinancing. The estimates are in the budget. They're net savings, so I went ahead and put them in the budget. It's the most accurate way to present your budget.
and, on number C, the tax levy,
It's on page number 5 of your budget. It is the exact same tax levy as the prior year and the same distribution.
make a motion.
Second.
Thank you, sir. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Passed unanimously. One more. Thank you, sir. Right here, thank everybody. That Dr. Phil said.
We got that, state present.
Folks,